Hi, thanks for checking out the Urban Permaculture Design Course. My name is Matt Bebo, and I'm with my colleague Rudy DeCruz, and we'd like to share with you some information about our curriculum so that you can make a more informed decision about whether or not this course is right for you.
Yeah, welcome to this video. We're gonna give you a general course overview. It's tentative because things change. We're in a flow, but we do have a overall framework. And then of course our own flavors, if you will, that we bring to it. And so we wanted you to have a feel for who we are and what we're bringing to this permaculture course, because each PDC is unique, and we definitely want you to have an experience that you desire. And so we want to make sure that this is a good fit because we've got some uniqueness that we'd love to share with you.
Yeah, so this course is an online course. We call it a sort of home study and virtual classroom course because we do have live classroom sessions that meets one weekend a month and then one Tuesday night per month. And a lot of the curriculum that we're about to show you actually comes to you in advance of the weekends that we spend together, and at your leisure, you can view that content. And then when we have our sessions together, we're not spending as much time reviewing, the core curriculum of the permaculture design course. We're spending that time actually interacting and having conversations and breaking into groups and having sort of interactive drawing activities and all kinds of neat things that we can do online that makes the course feel a lot more connected than you might think via an online format.
Yeah, and so I'd like to highlight two aspects of this urban permaculture design course, maybe more, that we try to focus on. One is the interactivity that Matt's talking about, so that we want to kind of break down some of this mythology around the instructors being the main knowledge keepers and really create a container and be more facilitators of knowledge and wisdom for what you bring into the room through your own life's experiences, and kind of foster that kind of community-based learning in a sense. And so in the classroom time with Zoom and even the design labs will be interactive discussion-based modules that reflect on the content that you viewed, or the designs and the places that you are bringing your attention and intention towards. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the curriculum, but also bring up another point that I feel like is important to us, which is, you will see braided through the entire program, is our attention to justice and designing for liberation. It's not kind of compressed into a 1 hour module. Because we don't think that that is useful when we are permaculture designers. It's not just about all the ecological systems. It's also very much about the culture part of the design. So we wanted to focus on that as much as we can. And so there's a social permaculture lens that's braided through the entire program that you will see. And then the third piece that I think is valuable to highlight is the fact that it's an urban permaculture design course. Most PDCs focus on broad scale and rural contexts, and this one is different because not all of us have access to land in that sense, and many of us, more of us, you look at population overall, more of us tend to be in cities. And so what are the opportunities for us where we are at, whether or not we own land?
So let's take a look.
One question we get quite a bit is, what's the time commitment? So we begin in November and the program runs until June. We meet one weekend, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is where like the discussions, and we will have like, some kind of framings and some rituals that we do together. But most of that will be interactive, those 3-hour sessions. And it's one weekend per month, so for 8 months from November to June. And then we will also have the design labs, which are kind of mid-month on a Tuesday evening from 5:30 to 7:30 Pacific. And the labs, the studio space, it's more a time for us to come together and problem solve the design work. So each month we'll cover enough material for you to be able to integrate that into a design project that you're working on. Most likely it'll be your own space just for now, practice. Some folks might have, other project sites that they're working with, whether it's a workplace or something like that, like a community orchard or something. But so when you're working on the design project, you'll kind of layer in 8 months worth of knowledge that you're integrating into a design, because it is a design course. And that's where in the design labs, some of the knowledge comes alive when you are applying it into your own contexts. And then roughly speaking, we would say with viewing the content in advance, attending the 6 hours of class on the weekend, 2-hour design lab, like we kind of should be spending about. There's a huge range of how much time you can spend on your design assignments, 2 to 6 hours. And that's because you could get really detailed if you want. And you could also, if you're a working professional, a parent, like, we end up wearing so many different hats. And so this can very well work within your existing schedule. It is a time commitment, so we do want to be straightforward about how much the commitment is. But we've had people from all walks of life, all age groups participate.
So this permaculture design course follows the standard curriculum for permaculture design courses, and you do get a permaculture design certificate as a product of completing the course. And so the content that we weave into it that covers more of an urban context and more of the social justice component is in addition to that. And a lot of the courses start off with an understanding of how we got here, and that's really foundational to figuring out where we're headed. And so you see this reflected here, where we're looking at the built environment, agriculture, land justice, taking a look at the grid, the colonial grid, and understanding how cities in particular affect how we relate and interact with each other so that we can strategically design for getting ourselves out of this sort of predicament that is a product of the built environment that surrounds many of us.
And then the second day in November, also really looking at some of the meta frameworks, right? Like mapping as a colonial industry or a colonial project, right? Of like, of conquest. And so in our practice of decentering Western narratives, decentering colonization, and really trying to refocus on the land's voice as well as indigenous voices or an indigenous way of being with land. So we will look at mapping in general as make like the physicality of making base maps and all that stuff, but also looking at more conceptual and perceptive ways of mapping.
And a bit of content that's going to come in on probably an alternating monthly schedule is what we call our sort of side tracks. I have a urban farming track because I live and work at an urban farm in Portland, and Rudy will be offering an herbal medicinal and craft track that will cover some medicine making and sort of natural crafting that really complements this content well. And so we've gotten really good feedback on that from our past course cohort. And so we're happy to offer that again this year.
Yeah, and something else, it's just kind of snuck in here, like the phenology. And I just want to say program, we'll really be doing things to kind of help you have a practice of being in place in a thoughtful and heartfelt way. And so we really want you to be utilizing design, not necessarily only in a very professional sense, but like bringing your artwork, your expression, your dreams, and more of these intuitive forms of perceiving and knowing and being with into the process. And so it's like this way of balancing some of the like the left brain kind of like logic, and which is useful, but then also the perceptive, more right brain kind of way of learning and thinking. So we're hoping to have a balance for different kinds of learners. And that's why we've kind of curated the program in a way that doesn't replicate some of the harmful ways that education tends to happen, and center certain voices and certain knowledges which are exclusionary and elitist to begin with.
So in December, we really get into the foundational understanding of permaculture with ethics and principles, really building that understanding foundation that maybe you might have had some exposure to permaculture through natural building or farming or gardening or something like that, but never really had the opportunity to learn that really kind of foundational content. And so that's definitely included and pretty critical in the process of taking a permaculture design course.
Yeah, and another like really useful tool is, it's a particular methodology within other methodologies in permaculture, but we found zones and sectors to be particularly useful. And this one I also want to share, like, oftentimes we will have access to something, right? Like either it's a program in our organization, or it's our backyard, or whatever it is, and we're like, I'm just going to go for it. And this is a program that we're offering that gives you an opportunity to like sit, reflect, plan things out, put a lot of intention. More intentional, and fitting our goals. And so sometimes people are like excited and they're like, why do I have to think about all these conceptual frameworks? And a lot happens in those realms that we don't often access. So it's worthwhile to kind of slow down and look at some of our own worldviews, beliefs, and also some kind of wisdom from the natural world, and also other like just design tools to kind of understand a landscape or a place from a variety of perspectives before we just kind of dive in and start messing with it in a way. So hopefully we make, as one of the guest instructors says, this is Hazel Ward from Siskiyou Permaculture, hopefully we make a good mess.
So kind of going with this pattern of broad to more specific as we go through the course content, we take a look at ecological design and how nature really is what's informing not just permaculture design, but a lot of decision making. We can find our inspiration in how nature has inherently solved problems and apply that to human problems. And one of the practices that's really important to develop as designers and as just folks navigating life is understanding patterns and recognizing patterns, and cross scales too, big scale, really small scale. And then there's really helpful observations and understanding of function and system processes that we get through not just pattern recognition, but the extrapolation of that to larger and smaller scales.
Yeah, and we are a part of nature, and so human systems are, at least. And so we are also applying the kind of melding and going back and forth between ecological and cultural design, because the two really do inform each other and can work together. And once we are more intentional about how we design our relationships to each other and to place, there's a lot of potentiality there to change things for the better and feel more fulfilled in the work and the work we're doing and the lives we are leading. So that's part of that, applying that pattern thinking and patterned perspective to our own lives, and then also to the design, right? Like, because we are doing this as a design course, and so we are in some way presuming and assuming the role of a designer. And so as we do that, how do we bring in, how do we be grounded in a lens for, or an approach towards liberation, an approach towards justice, so that we're not designing the same systems, or designing from the same systems that cause so much harm right now. So there's some stuff around stakeholder engagement, and these are all like, you know, lingo, but essentially it's like, how do we design with intention to relationships of all kinds, with the more than human world and within the human world as well. And I'll give you just, you know, we'll send this this PDF out as well, but I'll just give you a sneak peek into how these modules that we're talking about tie in directly with the assignment. So as we're talking about deeper stakeholder engagement, listening and attunement, that month's assignment will be having an interview process. So basically a conversation with whoever your client is. Sometimes it's yourself, sometimes it's your household, sometimes it's your workplace, like whoever it is. And bringing those aspects, those things, those patterns that you're seeing, like bringing them into the work that you are doing. So we're always wanting you to kind of weave in and apply what you're talking about, discussing and viewing, so that you have that direct experience with putting it into practice.
So now we're really getting into some of the chunkier content sections that are also still kind of big picture, but they get more specific in terms of how we can apply them to our urban or rural settings. So energy, appropriate technology, weather, climate, soils, both understanding formative processes and sort of bigger picture, you know, global scale, regional scale, and then looking at how we can affect our soil where we are and work with microclimate to grow a wider range of vegetables, for example, or a wider range of plants. And we also have an offering of techniques and strategies that are not prescriptive, but they're inspirational for creative strategies for employing the learning from these observations to apply with what we call kind of appropriate scale technology. So this is not very expensive and very elaborate kind of equipment and materials. It's how you can do it basically DIY as well as possible using very inexpensive materials in a very creative way. And then scrolling down to the next month's content. When we reference appropriate technology, that's a really kind of important term because it gives us a sort of reference to an assessment of technology, and that higher technological advancements are not necessarily practical. And in a permaculture design course, we're wanting to leverage the most available technologies. And so it might be simple, it might be a little bit advanced like the computers that we're on, but we're trying to make not just the material, but the practice as accessible as possible. And so appropriate technology is a reference to why is it appropriate? Because most people or many people can access it, and it's not going to be prohibitive in cost or, you know, just something that is not common throughout the world.
Yep. Then we move on to March, and we'll do some thinking and looking at broad scale design, because also, even if we're working on a smaller context, it's nice to look at a larger pattern, like we were looking at climate and weather and like larger soil systems, like again thinking about a larger watershed system and elevation, and you know, which all informs the particularities of your site wherever you are, even when we're in very urban contexts. I think it's beautiful to kind of peel back the layers of the grid, literally and figuratively, to unearth what and rewild, in a sense, what was there before, or bring that sense of wildness and naturalness into the future however we can. So that's like listening to the land and what are the patterns that are already in place, and then also translating that into more often urban context with urban water systems, and like, you know, where does our water come from, what are the what does that look like, what are the ways that we can be more water secure going into the future, and things like that.
Yeah, and on the topic of flow, we weave in a lot of social metaphors, and so conflict transformation and conflict resolution is an interesting one to pair with water when we're looking at flow. And so you'll find that throughout this course, there are kind of like sections of the content that pair well with the more kind of physical, what we would call like the practical or applied permaculture that relates to our social dynamics and social systems. Because as a teacher mentor of mine once said, you know, when it comes down to it, growing food is not that difficult. Figuring out how to work together with each other is actually where a lot of the work is.
Bingo. Now also kind of want to look at the design aspect, because we've been, you know, we've covered a fair amount of ground in terms of concepts, and this is a point in time which I think is really exciting. Well, it's March, so typically, at least where we are in the Pacific Northwest, spring is springing. And we start off with these design frameworks, conceptual frameworks, worldviews, like peeling back some of those layers, understanding more of the Earth's systems itself and our cultural systems, right? And then, of course, we don't want you to just like be floating off with some of these big concepts. We want to ground it in that application. And so here's where you really start to do some design work, right? Like in the first phase, almost up until February, you're more in a observation phase, which is critical in the practice of any, I would say, science-based inquiry. And so, you know, the mapping happens, and then you're analyzing with zones and sectors, some of the social systems, some of the other natural systems coming onto your site. You're then learning about how to understand the client's goals and needs and budget, all of which are really important, and some of their main priorities. And then you're funneling that into a list of things, what we call a program summary. And this was in February, so I'm kind of like updating you to March. So you make a program summary, which is like, oh, I think they wanted, you know, oftentimes in design, we're like, well, I want to like harvest some rainwater, and I think I want a swale. Like we think about these elements, if you will, like, you know, I want a rain garden is an element. We want these things, but we don't often know where best to place them until we do this like much more engaged design process. So instead of like just putting some cool permy like elements, right, onto a site without really understanding what they're doing and how they're interacting with each other, we help you funnel them into a list of things where, oh, this is what people are interested in, which is great. But then in this concept layer in March is where you're really starting to bring in the design. And you're like, oh, well, if I put the rainwater next to the pond, next to, like, you're starting to pair these elements together and design the relationships together, which is the really exciting part of the process. Exciting and scary, you know, but at the same time, we feel, you know, this is a point in time where a lot of people could get stuck, like a lot of analysis paralysis, but we have some really cool guest instructors coming in throughout. One of them is a beloved colleague, Molly, who's an architect and who kind of helps us get out of this, like, everything that we draw needs to be perfect kind of mode. And then we're just like doing sketches and trying things out and making messes and having fun with the design process, and, you know, trying new things.
Yeah, good design should not be elitist. We want to make sure that your comfort taking conceptual design ideas and putting a sketch down on paper is something that you're developing as a comfortable skill set, and that's going to really help us down the road, because really when we map things out and when we are doing this design work, the whole point is that we're not just going with an idea and implementing it wide scale and then like dealing with the consequences of that not working as well as we would have hoped. And so developing the skill set of going from design to kind of an application and then processing with that. We have many iterations of that throughout the course, so that one of the outcomes of the course is that you're more comfortable working out problems through a design process, so that by the time you're implementing, you've already worked out a lot of the potential issues and problems, and it's a much more integrated solution than if you just were to run with an idea. And sometimes that works, but that's not why we're taking a permaculture design course.
Nope. And then I'll also say at this point, a former participant lovingly said, I can never go back and it will never be simple again. And yes, that's true. And I think, again, this is where applying it comes really handy, that it's not just learning these big concepts and being like blown away by the magnitude of the mess that we're in right now. That's like one portion. But the exciting part is like all the opportunities that we have to respond with radical like love and liberation and all these different things that kept us really going. I know Matt and I personally, switching the permaculture course to an entirely online program while a pandemic's happening and the world's on fire and climate catastrophe and all this stuff was happening. And the intimacy that we discovered together, right, or uncovered together, rather, was kind of profound. It feels like we have known each other, even though some of us have never met in person. So it is a very, it can be a really deep process of learning about yourself as well as learning about the place that you're designing.
That's the secret that's out. It's not just about the hard physical stuff. It's really about discovery and finding really how all this helps inform who we are and how we're improving ourselves with the support of a very caring and intentional group. And we found that the folks that take this PDC are just that, and it's the part that people did not expect to have, and we're really moved and deeply appreciative for in the end.
So in April, we go into food forests and agroecology, and really kind of, again, with this theme of nature, culture are not separate. We are of this earth, and we have for longer than we've been very destructive, creating bad messes. We have known and co-evolved with our place in a really profoundly relational way. And so we will kind of look at some of those examples, look at some of that story, and also move into a little more of a place-based application, right? Because we're looking at what have Indigenous people done in the area, and how have they worked with the land, and how do they work with the land? What kind of access do they have? What does that access have to do with how we are designing for access to land, and how do we honor the Indigenous people whose land we're on? All of these questions are always on the table. And then we're also getting into microclimates and climate change. So again, like there's a place-based specificity to like what food would you, like how do we expand our view of food, right? And decolonize our diet, and start thinking about nurturing ourselves in a much more holistic way, like pre-agricultural society, those kinds of things, just bringing some of those threads forward into the present and into the future. And then also, as usual, looking at some of the cultural layers of, thinking about ourselves and our role, just like, in food forests, we're looking at different niches, also thinking about what role does humans are part of the food forest, right? You can't just design the system without us. So So what are those niches that we want to cultivate for ourselves? What are the niches we occupy and are moving towards to occupy and fulfill? And so with the homework part or the design part, we'll be kind of synthesizing some concepts, a fancy word for bubble maps. So we're still at the bubble map phase, right? At this point, just showing like it's a real slow build up because you're using design and art and all of these tools to kind of funnel through your best design thinking into something that will really work. So from there, we'll move into more of the, drawing your draft design, which will come in. We have one class in May that's at the end of May on April 30th, but we think of it more as the May weekend. So this is where you're really starting to synthesize everything into, okay, you're working on your presentation, your final design is coming together, and you're still getting some content in terms of animal systems and access to land, in terms of how are we, like, yeah, this design's cool and all in terms of, a closed system, but then how do we actually design for justice? Like, what does that mean in this context? And it's not the first time we talk about it. And so it's like revisiting that to be like, are there more opportunities here to think of ways to be in mutual aid of networks and be building community that way.
And what's becoming evident, I think you can see that, and Rindy was referencing this, that content pieces that we really kind of zoomed in on in previous months, so say like water and soil, and then we really figure out the interplay and the relationship between water and soil, and then like plants and animals and fungi and the interaction between those. And so it's just not just a deep understanding of something, but a deep understanding of how they're connected and related. And this is really like a kind of decolonizing our minds departure from objectivity and subject, and having like just a little bit of understanding about something, but you remember the names, so you think that you know what it is. And in permaculture, we're less concerned about knowing what it is as we are about knowing how it relates to other pieces and how they work together and what are their characteristics, and how different pieces coming together make something that's more than the sum of their parts, in a sense. So that's really where we get into guilds, plant guilds, animal guilds, and then again relaying the concept of guilds to social systems and social dynamics. And that's the approach that we're taking to how we're weaving that content into this course.
And then the last month, June, we will do some touring of some permaculture sites that we really like, because again, you all have been in this deep process of like focusing on your site. And sometimes it's nice to be like, oh, let's go to this other place and then walk through their design thinking. And then you get ideas and you're like, whoa, that was surprisingly easy, right? Because it's been all up here, like, people are usually really being thoughtful in a good way. And so then to just see it and you're like, wow, all that work, and like, it looks like a beautiful garden. That's amazing. Or, oh, I thought that would be really simple, but it seems like that those animals with this lifestyle like don't necessarily match. So just those real world examples again of people living the design, right? Like, because it's a living design. And so we'll do some tours with some folks, and then we will also tackle this topic of what are we doing in the future. Not everyone who does this course, I would say most people who do this course are not going to go on to become like professional permaculture designers, right? Like, we're not only wanting this to be like this kind of perma church where we're like funneling people into this particular way of life or anything like that, but rather it's how do we use design tools in a thoughtful way to design ourselves back into relationship with place, with each other, with ourselves. And so there's a variety of ways to do that. One of the things that a lot of people have said is that it's changed their life. And I think it always changes ours as well, as people holding and facilitating the space. The point is to grow into ourselves more fully, and this is a way to do that. And so we'll have some conversation about what that means for each one of us, which I think is another way to really set the ground for how we can be together during these times, where it's not often that we can build a community and be held in holding some of this this ecological grief, and other kinds of grief, racial grief, intergenerational grief. There's so much that's happening in our worlds. And I know for me personally, to be in a group with 20 other people who are just here to do the work, that's pretty profound to just even witness and be a part of, and then come out the other side. And that these are folks that are in the same movement, or in the same, that like we got each other's backs if we need to, like really move into kick things into a different gear. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that. Matt, do you have any last thoughts to share about the?
Yeah, sure. And we didn't really speak a whole ton to the nature of the design project, but that's certainly a very practical outcome of the course as well, because most participants are choosing their home site to do these design activities and going through the process to have as an outcome a final or sort of presentable design that is integrating all of the things that we learned in the course. And so where a lot of permaculture courses don't have the course participants working on their own site, we think it's really important that one of the potential outcomes is implementation. It's not a requirement or an expectation, but it's a real true potential outcome that you've produced a design for yourself for either your home site or a site that you're connected to and have access to, that very may well reach implementation. And that's your journey beyond the course, and we support as much as we can that kind of manifestation. In some cases in the past, we've been able to find grant money for projects where if your project had sort of a social justice component or is supporting underserved community, we sometimes are able to leverage resources that City Repair has access to help see that come through. So it's not just, oh, you're done with the course, that's it. For folks that have found edges with the work that we're doing and want to continue to develop that edge, we've made some really great lasting relationships that way.
Yeah, and there's two things that I wanted to highlight as well. Earlier in this program, we also give you opportunity to do that, to develop a portion of your design, like a phase of your design that is implementable through the village building convergence. VBC has changed dramatically because of COVID, because of gatherings being so restricted. So, but I think we're in a time where we're a little more used to COVID. So I think there's opportunity for us to do more work to support that. And all of these big words, basically it's like helping you design and implement a work party where you get some stuff done, right? Like it's one part of the system. So moving from the paper onto the land, like let's just get this stuff done and have a bunch of people who can show up and we must and distance. And so it can be pretty simple, and work goes obviously so much quicker when there's more of us. So so there's that element. And then also what we've done is the village building convergence, we do different things, including workshops and presentations and showcases. And there's like, in the past, we've had like over 20 placemaking project sites or community sites doing different projects. That number has kind of morphed over time. And I would say it doesn't happen in the compressed dates of the VBC, which are the June 3rd to the 12th next year. So it kind of happens throughout the season right now, which has been really helpful with COVID especially. But all of that to say, those 10 days, the Friday, June 3rd to the 12th, that time, since we're already doing a program and showcasing different people, if you are excited to present your design to a wider audience, that would be an opportunity that we love having people show off their design, because so much thoughtfulness and intentionality has gone into it. And ultimately, it can also be just a way to dispel the myth that that everybody that design is an elite field and for only a few people, but rather that we're all designers and that we can bring that thoughtfulness into so many aspects in our life.
Yeah, so we hope this helped answer some questions for you, and you can reach us at updc@cityrepair.org. We have some upcoming open houses, and don't want to put too much information here that's going to expire really soon. So we'll just say that we're available to answer your questions, and we really hope that you join us this year. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, y'all.